and I'm the one putting on this presentation for you all today as part of the Grad Mental Health Series. I also want to acknowledge those that are helping me put on today's presentation. That's Michael Decker and Amanda Palmer from the College of Graduate Studies. We would not be able to do this without them, and they're helping us kind of put this presentation on today. So a huge shout out to them helping us today. With regards to, this presentation specifically today, the title of the presentation, as you can see, Unleashing Your Potential, Defeating Imposter Syndrome. I think this is a topic that resonates with a lot of individuals, but especially I think maybe in graduate school, because, you're taking that advancement with your education. You are becoming more advanced in that way. And with more advancement, those feelings can come up and feeling like maybe I'm not enough, or maybe I'm struggling to, comparative to peers or colleagues. I'm curious whether you want to say it out loud or if you want to put it in the chat. I'm curious, what about today's topic kind of drew you in? Was there something about today's topic that caught your attention or made you want to be interested in attending today? I see the first one says, I feel like the word defeating because I feel like it keeps coming back over and over. Yep. Yeah, it's common. And I will also say it tends to come up early career too. Though it might come up, more than that. We'll get more into it in a little bit. Any other thoughts about, what kind of drew you to today's presentation and topic? Anything else? Oh, okay. Wendy, I see you said, working on my PhD and I felt disconnected since I finished coursework. Not uncommon. I've gone through a period of self-doubt. Yeah. I see another one from Lee saying, I've had bad imposter syndrome since I started grad school and a new job simultaneously. Pretty sure I'm just pretending to know what I'm doing. Oh, yeah, I can resonate with that, especially when I think back to my, I see someone else is resonating with that as well. I see another one from Irma. Hello, I was very interested as every time I read something about imposter syndrome, I feel totally identified. Gosh, I think we could probably have a whole support group over this topic as grad students. Well, thank you all for sharing. I appreciate it. I'll ask you more questions along the way, but if you have questions along the way, you are welcome to ask. I will give a caveat that we are recording the presentation. So if there's anything you feel uncomfortable asking during the presentation, we'll leave a little bit of time at the end of the presentation if there's something that you want to ask that you just don't feel comfortable with recording. But I just thought I'd give you that caveat before we get started. So let's jump in a little bit. Oh gosh, let's see if I'm skilled enough to get through. Okay, there we go. So I'm going to start with a quote because I think quotes can lead us to all sorts of places and can help us feel a little validated. I got this one from Albert Einstein. I think helpful because we typically think of Albert Einstein as a very successful individual, very smart. But this quote is, the exaggerated esteem in which my life work is held makes me very ill at ease. I feel compelled to think of myself as an involuntary swindler. I think that's something we can resonate with, but I also think it just speaks to the universality of this experience that so many of us can have, and hopefully something you can also connect with as well. But I just think it's important that even the most successful people by our society's definition can experience this too. So it's not just, on a individual level, it's even, with people that we would identify as very successful, smart, whatever word you want to kind of plug in there. Okay, so for today's agenda, this is just kind of the pieces that we're going to cover during our presentation today. One, let's have some discussion around imposter syndrome. What is it? What's the language that we're using around it to better understand it? But then also, what are strategies to help combat our experiences of imposter syndrome? And if we're thinking of a continuum, if we're thinking of esteem specifically, low self-esteem versus high self-esteem, confidence is a really big piece of that. So we'll talk a little bit about building self-confidence, and then we'll leave some time at the end for any questions or things that you want to discuss, as well as some resources as well. Okay. So actually, the term that we use in the research land is imposter phenomenon, but most of us call it imposter syndrome. Don't worry, it's not DSM related. It's a more universal experience, but an easy way for us to reference it, right? So we're looking kind of from, our understanding of it. The term imposter phenomenon, I should say, was first described in 1970s by Pauline Rose Clance, PhD, and Suzanne Imes. This term is used to kind of designate an internal experience of intellectual phonies. I think that can jive with some of the comments that I saw that we were putting in there, feeling, basically that we're imposters, right? Like we shouldn't be in this position, or we shouldn't have the success we have. And if someone really knew what was going on, oh my goodness, the game is up. I think the really important part is that we can experience this despite our academic or professional accomplishments. So we can be very accomplished and still experience this. And I think that is very important to designate. I think it's another reason why I put the Albert Einstein quote in there too, right? That is someone we think of as very well accomplished, who yet also experienced this. And this is a very common experience. And then the experience of imposter belief does not appear to be affected by multiple achievements. And I think that's important as well, because I think the thought is, if I do more, or if I meet, a certain title, or a certain degree, or if I get a certain, type of grant, or I accomplish this thing, then I won't feel this way. And it doesn't seem to be affected by achievement. So I think that's important as well, that in our minds, we can feel like, oh, if I just do these things, it will get better. And truth is, it's just an internal experience. And there's other ways to maybe approach it, aside from just achieving more and more. I like definitions. This one is from the American Psychological Association, the APA. So I will say this is not my quote. This is the APA's quote of how they define imposter phenomenon. They say the situation in which highly accomplished, successful individuals paradoxically believe they are frauds who will ultimately fail and be unmasked as incompetent. Now, for anyone who really experiences imposter phenomenon, you may have read this and been like, well, this clearly doesn't apply to me because I might not be highly accomplished and successful. And that might give you some indications that something's going on for you. So it's not to mean that you're the most accomplished or the most successful. It's just that you have accomplished some things. You have been successful in some areas, and yet you still feel like you are not necessarily competent, or you don't feel like, you kind of feel like a fraud, in these specific roles. Maybe it's academics, career, maybe it's somewhere else in your life. But I will say, when you read this, most of us are like, well, I don't know if this applies to me. So I say that in the sense that don't take that too seriously. The piece is really that despite your accomplishments and despite having success in your life, you still feel this kind of feeling underneath. And it doesn't, and I think the other piece to highlight here is it doesn't have to apply to everything. It could apply to specific situations, specific skills, specific areas of knowledge or education. It doesn't have to be widespread, though it can feel that way. And so it's maybe thinking for you, where are the areas that you feel a little more like an imposter? Or where does it tend to come up the most for you? Because, certain situations can trigger those pieces. Maybe you're being asked a question on something that you don't have a lot of knowledge about, or you don't feel knowledgeable enough about it to answer really well. And maybe that's when those feelings come up. So it's more of just to kind of get you thinking for yourself, where does this tend to show up in your life? Okay. And I kind of like visuals. Uh, so I really love this. This is kind of the idea of how imposter syndrome might show up internally. And if you think about these circles, this is kind of your internal thoughts about yourself specifically. So you see, the big circle is kind of what do I think of myself and who I am? And then there's a small little circle that's like what I logically know. Like I know this is true, but I really think or feel this way. And how I like to kind of differentiate it is kind of logic, mind or logic thought versus kind of that emotional kind of self-esteem kind of thoughts. Because we may logically know we've accomplished things or been successful, but we may kind of more internally and emotionally feel, oh, if they only knew. And I think, I want you to just take a look at some of these comments here. These are just examples of kind of internal thoughts that may come up for you if you experience imposter syndrome, not feeling smart enough, feeling like things just happen because you're lucky or it just happened to all go together perfectly, feeling like you're a fraud or feeling kind of awkward or not kind of, at a kind of stable or graceful approach. Maybe feeling lazy despite the things that you've accomplished, feeling like you don't have talent, not feeling productive. That is a common one I hear in grad school. I can speak to my own experience of grad school. That came up for me. Not doing enough, similar kind of idea. Feeling kind of like I'm a mess and I'm just trying to hold it all together and hoping no one notices. Or feeling like, maybe I'm annoying or kind of bothersome. This sometimes happens specifically like with professors, right? Like, do I feel like I'm annoying this professor with how much I'm asking questions? I see some head nods. So this is kind of the view or the ideas of thought that come up when we're in a place of imposter syndrome. Now, I think the other important area is to look at the reality, kind of checking ourselves, right? And that's kind of this other set of circles to the right. So when we take a step back out of those thoughts and we think about ourselves from this kind of more logical reason based, looking at evidence pieces, that kind of knowledge about ourselves, as well as what we know of others. What do others think of me? What do others think about the work that I'm doing? And that can kind of help not only balance it, but also create kind of a more realistic depiction of yourself. Because unfortunately, imposter syndrome tends to be more exaggerated negative thoughts, right? If we really took a minute to really question those thoughts or beliefs about ourselves, we might find some evidence that suggests it's not as exacerbated as it may feel internally. And so that's why it's important to kind of look at these other two circles of like, if I take a step out of this and really look at my life and what I've done and what I know others have told me or think of me, what's kind of maybe that middle ground in between? Any questions so far? I know we're kind of flying through some slides. I just want to make sure I'm not missing anything. We'll move on to the next one. Okay. Oh, there we go. All right, so I think, the biggest pieces of imposter phenomenon are a lot of these kind of areas that are listed here, kind of doubting your skills, doubting your talent or accomplishments, maybe attributing those talents and accomplishments to other things, right? Well, the only reason I accomplished this was because of X, Y, and Z, or I was just lucky it just happened to go that way. Kind of an inability to realistically assess your confidence and skills. That's kind of what I was talking about on the slide before, right? I may think or feel this way, but if I take a step back and really look at the big picture from more of a logical standpoint or evidence-based, maybe it doesn't quite match up. Experiences of self-doubt or feeling kind of low self-esteem related to those particular areas of competence or characteristics. Attributing success or accomplishments to external factors, kind of like I talked about before. Fear that you won't live up to expectations. Whew. I feel like this comes up a lot with professors, right? Professors set, expectations and standards and feeling like, ooh, I don't want to let this person down, but I'm not sure if I can really do this. A tendency to overachieve. Sometimes we have tendencies to do this to help mask our internal feelings. If I feel like I'm a fraud, if I feel like I'm not confident or skilled, I might go over and above so that no one actually notices or looks behind the mask, metaphorically. And then setting up unrealistic expectations for yourself and feeling disappointed when they're not reached. I think this is a really important one, especially in grad school, because you have so much to accomplish in a short amount of time. And sometimes you're like, well, I should have X, Y, and Z but done by X, Y, by this month, right? But if we took a step back and really looked at all the things that are going to happen in that time period, is it a realistic expectation? But when we set unrealistic expectations, then it's kind of setting ourselves up for failure, right? Because then we get there and we're like, we didn't do the thing we wanted to do within this time, and now I'm a failure. Or now I'm going to be disappointed, or my professor is going to be disappointed in me. So those are pieces as well that come up specifically with the imposter phenomenon. So those are kind of just some pieces to one. I think it's important to have understanding and awareness around it, because I think we use it as a conversation piece throughout grad school, but throughout academics, but also in careers. But when we start really going underneath the surface, what is this? It can help us build a little bit of awareness of how it shows up in our lives, so that maybe we can try to intervene before it affects us in some way, whether that's affecting our ability to complete things, or, feeling like it affects our presentation, or just feeling just low about ourselves with regards to what we're working on. So the goal is to have some awareness and understanding around it, so that when we implement things, we have awareness of where it shows up the most in our lives. Any questions so far before I move on from imposter phenomenon? Sorry, I just had to shut something off. I'm seeing blank faces, so I'm thinking it's a no. All right, so the other parts of this, strategies to combat imposter syndrome. Now, I want to spend a little bit of time here because, I think at this point you have some general understanding about imposter syndrome. Now we've gotten some more detailed ideas of maybe where it shows up for you in your own life. But this is really important for how do I go about trying to reduce it? I will say outright, this is not going to change overnight. I like to think of this as maybe incremental awareness / intervention, right? And for you, it's how do I kind of slowly integrate these things and make them part of normal practice for me, especially in the times and places where I experience imposter syndrome the most. And as you do this more, it gets easier. So I think, as kind of like I was inferring before, recognize your accomplishments and expertise. What are the things in your life that you feel accomplished about, or that you feel like even other people acknowledge as an accomplishment for you? What are the areas that you feel knowledgeable, or like you're on track at least to maybe become an expert? Maybe because we're still in grad school. But maybe there is an area that you are an expert in. I think recognizing those areas is really important. And I'll talk a little bit in a few minutes about recognizing these things does not mean that you're going to fall on the other end of things and become arrogant and really kind of self-promoting. The goal is that we can acknowledge the real things happening or have happened in your life that do support that you are skilled in this area that you feel less competent in. So it's really looking at those pieces that it's kind of like building a case. I really like to think of it. It's kind of like if we're thinking about law and we're thinking about lawyers, it's building a case internally for yourself for why you shouldn't feel like you're an imposter. And when we can have these really tangible things we can hold on to, it's easier to combat those thoughts, right? If I'm feeling like, oh, I'm so lazy, I don't know how comparative to my peers, I just feel like I am not as productive. I'm not as on top of things. I'm just really behind. But then if you take a look at all that you've accomplished till this point, you might start to feel like, yeah, I may feel that way, but there's a lot of evidence to suggest I'm maybe more on track than I give myself credit. I will speak to my own experience. I was in grad school. That was a regular feeling I had. And you know what? I suspect if you talk to some of your peers in your classes, you may also find that other people feel that way as well. So I say that because if we really take a step back and say, okay, what have I really accomplished in this time? What have I done? You might be surprised at what you find. And when you can hold on to really tangible items, like as kind of like an evidence, right? If we're talking about that argument that we're having in our head, and not argument as a conflict, but argument as if we're thinking, like we're in a court of law, right? We're building a case, we're building an argument. In this case, it's what are these really tangible things that you can hold on to hang your hat and say, yeah, maybe there are moments I may feel lazy or not productive, but overall, I'm actually doing a lot. So hold on to those things. Remember what you do well. There is a reason you are in this place in your life. There's a reason you have made these accomplishments, that you've found these areas of expertise. Remember what you do well, because I think, especially in grad school, there is this phenomena that happens, right? You go to grad school and you're surrounded by a bunch of people who overachieved as well. In a good way, right? We're surrounded by people who have wanted to further their education in a way, whether that's for academic purposes, career purposes, but they've done enough to make it to grad school, right? And that sometimes can skew our view of the world, because all of a sudden we're making comparisons to those around us. But if most of the people around us are actually well accomplished, then it's harder to have a realistic comparison to the world, right? So I regularly encourage people to think about, you're making comparisons to your peers, but think also just on a global sense, how many people go to grad school? It's not that high of amount. It's getting higher, but and then you can get into the specifics. How many people are in your specific graduate program? Not only here, but maybe across the nation, right? It gets smaller and smaller. And then you realize, wow, maybe I have accomplished something here despite just how I feel about it. But remembering what you do well is important. My biggest one, no one is perfect. I think when we make comparisons, especially, it can feel like, wow, so-and-so has it so together. They are on top of everything. I am nowhere near that. And fun fact, I've met with lots of graduate students, and I don't know anyone who feels like they have fully got it down. And it's the same in the career field too. You can see people who have accomplished a lot that it feels like they have it all together. But no one is perfect. Everyone makes mistakes. And everyone has areas that they don't feel very skilled or competent in. It doesn't really matter who you are and even how far you are into your profession. There are going to be areas that you don't feel as skilled in, even if you're the most successful person in that area. Though they probably wouldn't self-acknowledge as that. Another one I'm going to encourage actually very highly is talking with mentors. You're not the first person to go through this process of graduate school, imposter syndrome, you name it, you're not. And sometimes it's nice to have mentors because one, they've been through it before, but two, maybe they've gained some skills along the way that have helped them kind of navigate those thoughts and feelings related. But they also may be able to provide you feedback, right? Just because there's an area that you don't feel as competent in doesn't mean that's actually necessarily accurate or realistic. I think a great example that we can all relate to is presentations. I think all of us can think about a presentation where we didn't feel that great about it. Any raise of hands, presentation that you didn't feel super great about? You can even put it in the comments. Oh, I see lots of hands raising. Yes, I think we can all think about that. And then I wonder, maybe you had an opportunity to talk to someone afterwards. Maybe you were able to get feedback from others afterwards. My guess is your perceivement about that presentation was much worse than anyone else's. And my guess is also that you noticed things about yourself during the presentation that no one else noticed. I think that's a great example, right? We can see things in ourselves that maybe others are really actually not noticing, or not even suggesting are areas that you aren't confident in or aren't skilled in. So I think talking with mentors can also help us build a realistic area for areas of growth, because you might be focusing on an area that others aren't really thinking are an area that you're lacking in. So I think that can be helpful, but I think mentors just in general can provide great advice. I highly encourage it. I am years out of grad school and I still talk to my mentors. I think they can be a great source of connection, but also just advice as not only as you're going through grad school, but as you enter the field, and for networking purposes can be great as well. Reframing your way of thinking, I think, is a very important one. Oftentimes, as you notice that big circle we referenced earlier, these thoughts can be quite negative and they can be a bit harsh. I like to think of it as kind of that internal bully, right? We are the kind of that phrasing of we are our own worst critics is so true. You know, we are. We know the areas that hurt the most or that are hardest areas, and that internal critic can really get at those in a way that no real outside bully could really do. And so I think by addressing these thoughts and reframing them, that can be very helpful, right? Maybe, we'll use the one I used earlier, right? Feeling, lazy or not as productive. Maybe you just had a really hard course that you're getting through, or a really hard project or research thing that you're just finishing up, or that you've been really working on, and it's like, well, yeah, maybe I'm feeling a bit tired and run down, or maybe a little bit burnt out, and maybe I can hold a little bit of patience for myself, knowing what's going on. I also think just being in grad school alone sets you up for a lot of stress and anxiety. That's not just my opinion. There's a lot of research to support that as well. So maybe it's, grad school is really hard, and it doesn't matter who you are. Grad school can be hard. And so holding the space of like, maybe it's less about being lazy or not productive and more of just, this is a really hard thing that I'm doing. And having that patience, but also compassion, that self-compassion for yourself of like, this is hard and I don't need to make it harder on myself. Another one is reach out for help or support. Utilize your support systems. I'm hoping for each of you, you can think of at least one person that you can call or text. They don't have to necessarily be in your program, but maybe they are. Maybe it's a really good friend. Maybe it's a close family member. Maybe it's a romantic partner, either married or dating. But think about those people and how you can utilize them. I'll use a great example from my own grad school experience. Life gets really busy. It's hard sometimes to fit in socializing and friends, especially without feeling, sometimes guilt. Sometimes that can come up. I know for me in grad school, the way that I was a decent human being was every week I went to dinner with a close friend. That was at least every week something I could look forward to and trust. Now, there were some weeks I did more than that. There were some weeks that I wasn't able to, but for the most part, I was very consistent in that. And that helped me. That's an example for me personally. And it's thinking about, how can you incorporate your support system into your life in a way that helps balance it too? Because if we're so overwhelmed by these areas of grad school, academics, or just regularly feeling like we're just not as skilled, or feeling like an imposter, that is tough. And we've got to have people that we feel like, this person gets me, they understand me, and I at least have this space outside of all of this to be able to talk to somebody and just be myself. I'm curious, is there any questions or even just thoughts? Maybe there are things that you're already doing from this list, but I would be curious to see, what are things that have been helpful for you as you've been dealing with this? Oh, I saw some comments earlier. Sorry, I missed them. This speaks to me. I've done a bunch of public speaking on cameras, news interviews, and I'm still shaky and nervous. Oh, me too sometimes. But yeah, most people don't notice those little small things that we do. We always do, right? There's something to be said for growing in your courage, recognizing how much courage it takes to speak anyway. You may not feel like the most accomplished speaker when it's over, but your courage is something you can't deny. I love that. That's a really good one. Oh, I love this. I taught math for 11 years, so I thought I'd be good at speaking in front of groups of people, but I'm terrified to speak in front of adults. I like it. I like it. Something about the public speaking really resonated with a few of you, I hear. I don't know. I'm reading some of those. I like the idea of dinner. Yeah. Sometimes having just a small goal or just something that's routine, that's always in your schedule, can be really helpful, especially if your schedule is really busy or overwhelming, or you just don't have a lot of time for things. Definitely, I see one that says, definitely having someone to talk to about what I'm going through. Every morning I go to the gym with another person in my cohort, and that time helps us so much when we feel feeling overwhelmed, because we can talk with each other about, yes, I highly encourage, if you haven't talked to any of your cohort mates that you feel, comfortable, you would be surprised at how many similar experiences you may be having with them. I see this, reframe the way of thinking is the best. I think that will be reachable, talking with my mentor for a long time. Okay, yeah, I think those are very helpful. Yeah, like I said, we can be our own worst critics for sure, and it can be tough. And when we can kind of change that narrative that's happening internally, I like to think of it as changing it from this harsh critic to a supportive friend, that internal dialogue, right? We want to try to be an internal support for ourselves rather than this harsh critic. And so, like I said, it doesn't change overnight, but maybe it's simply kind of cluing into, what are your thoughts? What are patterns in your thoughts, and how can we make small incremental changes from that harsh critic to a supportive friend? Right. And sometimes when it's hard to think about these things, it's thinking about, if I had a close friend that was having these thoughts or experiences, what would I tell them? What would I want them to think about or know? And sometimes that's helpful in thinking about how you want to talk to yourself internally as well. So those are just a couple ideas and thoughts. I think the other piece, I forgot to mention this too. If you feel like you're having challenges identifying accomplishments or expertise, or challenges in identifying areas that you feel like you do well, like it's just very hard to identify those internally, ask somebody who knows you really well. That would be my encouragement. Ask someone who knows you really well. If the area of feeling an imposter is kind of more grad school related, maybe it's talking to a cohort mate, maybe it's talking to a professor or a mentor. If you feel like it's something related to your personal life, I think a common one that I see imposter syndrome personal life is usually related to family. But there's other areas that can show up too. Maybe it's dating. Asking someone in your personal life, a good friend, a family member, what are things that are positive characteristics about you? Like I said, if that's something that's you're having challenges with, I would highly encourage reaching out to those people that you feel comfortable and trustworthy and just saying, hey, like, what do you like when you think about my accomplishments or areas of like expertise or knowledge, like what comes to mind for you? Or when you think of skills or characteristics of me that are good or positive, what comes to mind for you? And I think these are when we can hold those little nuggets internally, right? Some people actually make a list because it's just hard to maybe hold those things in our minds. But I think, for me, and an encouragement I do for a lot of people is have that list in the back of your mind, right? Have that like go-to list so that when you're having a hard day and these feelings of imposter syndrome are at their most, maybe it's like, I'm at a conference and I have to talk to all these people who are experts in this area and I don't feel qualified to have this conversation. Have that list ready in the back of your mind to remind yourself, what are the areas that I'm good at? What are the accomplishments I've got? What is evidence to support I should be here and knowledgeable on this topic? All right. Let's just seeing if I missed anything. Oh, I think I see a question. Could the imposter phenomenon be used as a means to grow ourselves instead of just nagging ourselves with that critical thought? Yes, I think so. I definitely do. I think it depends on the thought, right? Well, I love using me as an example because I don't want to throw anyone under the bus. So I'm a licensed psychologist, right? So I could have this thought of, I am not qualified to be doing this work. That may be a less helpful thought and maybe less helpful for me growing in the work that I'm doing because I've got a doctorate, I got through licensing boards, I've been under supervision for quite some time. That might be a less helpful thought. However, I could have a thought that's like, maybe I don't feel confident or skilled in this particular area. For me, what would be an example? So for example, I'm wanting to do more training related to ASD. Now that's an area I do have some expertise in, but I think there's some up and growing areas that I want to continue to grow in. So it's not that I'm not skilled in that area, but it's an area I want to continue. Same thing with, I love neuropsychological pieces. I've done neuropsych courses and trainings, but that's an area I still want to grow in. I still want to gain more competency in a wider range of areas. So I think it depends on the specific thought and belief. So taking a look at it and saying, okay, maybe this is an area that I feel less skilled in. How can I beef that up so I feel better about it? Or maybe it's the other end of things. Maybe it's okay to not have all the answers for everything in your field. As a psychologist, I'm not expected to have specific expertise in all areas of mental health. And it's okay to acknowledge for me the areas that I'm less skilled in or I have less expertise in. And that's okay. So I think it's kind of differentiating those thoughts and evaluating the thoughts coming up for you. Hopefully that helps answer the question. I also saw one thing I have found talking with my mentor is she also reminds me of how normal, yes, normal, all of my feelings, doubts, worries, stresses, I can't see that one, are about, she's been teaching since 1980. So she's been in all with students, often reassures me that, yes. And I think that's something I want to reiterate. I've talked with a lot of graduate students over the years, and I think a lot of these things are much more normal than we give credit, but our kind of that internal critic tells us it's just us. We're the only one that experienced this, or if people knew that I felt this way, they would think differently of me. But I actually find that the more people share some of these thoughts and feelings, the more that there are these moments of connection with other people, either in graduate school, in the field. There's something about this experience of imposter syndrome that many of us can connect to. And so I actually think If you find that there's somebody, around you in your process, whether that's your professional work, academic work, or personal work, I think, if you feel comfortable sharing these things, you might find that it's actually a point of connection often. All right. So we'll move on to building confidence, because I think in my mind, this is a continuum. If I'm kind of more on the feeling of imposter syndrome, I'm feeling kind of lower self-esteem on certain areas. Like I said, it's not maybe overall self-esteem, but maybe related to certain areas in my life. And if we're thinking of it as a continuum, building confidence and building self-esteem around these certain areas is how do we get to the other end of that continuum. So these are some strategies to help build self-confidence. You'll notice with a lot of these, they're a little bit more broad and general. I will encourage you, if you feel like these are areas that you want more support, or you want more specific advice or suggestions, I would encourage, talking to someone. I work here at the Counseling and Mental Health Center. We have a number of clinicians on staff who are very well skilled. But if you're ever kind of looking at these and saying, well, these are rather broad or general or vague, yes, they are. The goal is so that they kind of speak to a wider range of individuals. But if you're feeling like, yeah, this is really an area I would love some support in, that is definitely a resource for you. And in regards to these strategies, I love this. This first bullet point comes from the TED Talk with Amy Cuddy. I actually put the link at the bottom of this page. And this phrase is fake it till you become it. We've all heard fake it till you make it. She changed it a little bit, fake it till you become it, because as we practice kind of confidence related skills, the more likely we are to actually feel confident over the long haul. Now, at first, it might feel uncomfortable, awkward, might not feel like a good match, but over time, it gets a little easier. In this case, Amy Cuddy talks about body language, right? If I sit in a way that makes me feel more confident or exudes confidence, then maybe I will build a little bit of confidence with that. Now, I take it a step further in that, maybe it's just small things, like maybe I have a meeting that I want to practice this. It's maybe not, I'm not going to be confident everywhere, but maybe in this meeting, this upcoming meeting or presentation, I'm going to practice trying to be confident, even though I may not feel it internally. And I think that can be a really helpful thing, because as we practice being more confident, we can build that feeling more internally. Honestly, assessing your skills and knowledge, this is kind of what I had mentioned before. I think it's that idea of taking a step back, because we get a little bit caught up in our thoughts internally, and that idea that we can just take a step back and really look at what skills and knowledge we have, and maybe getting feedback from others on what are my areas of skills and knowledge can give us a realistic depiction of where we do have skills, and also maybe where we have growing edges. I like that phrasing, right? Maybe there's areas that I'm still gaining competence, knowledge, and skills and can continue working on, but have maybe a general sense of that knowledge. I think the idea of becoming more comfortable with owning those skills and areas of expertise, I think this will be very helpful as you're in grad school, because you are building this right now. And getting more comfortable saying, yeah, this is something I feel skilled in, or this is something I feel knowledgeable about, and being okay and maybe comfortable speaking to that. And like I said, it isn't going to happen overnight, but maybe in these small moments, it's practicing being comfortable owning your skills. Like I said, the example of the conference, maybe that's somewhere we can practice in a small bit of time, owning those skills and areas of expertise, even if we don't feel 100% about them internally. Starting to build and practice skills in a safe environment. I think this is very important. That's why I mentioned talking to mentors. As you're building your confidence, if you start kind of in smaller environments where, you can kind of trust the people around you are going to give you helpful advice or feedback, that's where I encourage. Plus, it's a little easier if it's around people you trust as you're trying to practice these skills. because you don't feel like maybe they'll be a bit harsh. The example of presentation's a really good one, right? Maybe practicing that confidence in your presentation in a group of people you feel comfortable with first before practicing that with a larger group. I think I might have, oh, okay. Oh, did I not get the right, that might have been an old.
No, I shared one and then I deleted the one I shared. That's all. Sorry.
Oh,
That's confusing if you didn't see the one I deleted.
you're
Sorry.
good, you're good. Kind of going back to something I mentioned earlier, if we think about this continuum of confidence, one is feeling low confidence, one is feeling high confidence. I think the goal is somewhere in the middle, right? If you're feeling like you're on the lower end, especially on certain topics, it doesn't have to be everything. Once again, it could be really specific things. When we start to communicate and work on our confidence, sometimes it can feel like arrogance or self-promotion at first because it feels starkly different from where we started. But I think the goal is that just because you're working on feeling confident doesn't mean you're necessarily arrogant or self-promoting. And I think that's what I encourage, because that is often feedback I get from people as they start practicing these skills of confidence. They're like, well, I don't want to become a know-it-all, or I don't want to become like I know everything. And my guess is for those individuals who do struggle with confidence, you're probably far from falling in the arrogance of self-promotion, at least at first. So I just give that as a caution that it may at first feel like arrogance or self-promotion, but kind of balancing with that, hey, we're practicing that skill. That doesn't necessarily mean that we've jumped all the way to the other end of the continuum. Maybe it's just practicing more than I have felt before. And last but not least, seeking feedback. If there's areas that you're feeling like you're less skilled or less confident about, seek that feedback from others. Maybe it's an area that actually others think is an area of strength or skill for you, and that helps provide feedback for you in terms of your confidence. But also maybe it is an area that you do struggle in, or comparative to your other areas of knowledge or expertise or success has been more of a challenge. And so maybe seeking feedback can help build that up or give you ideas or strategies for how to build that up. So these are just some general kind of recommendations for building self-confidence. Like I said, if you're interested in kind of, getting more individualized, specific advice for you and your situation, I'd highly encourage talking to somebody. I'm actually going to share here in a second. Here is my information, but I'm also going to, and I'll come back to that in a second. But I want to share the Counseling Mental Health Center. I showed a picture because sometimes people don't know what building we're in. We are over at Mary Forney Hall, which is across the way from the admin lawn and across from like the fraternity farmhouse, that old one. If you guys get any idea, but that's just a picture of what it looks like. We have clinicians that work with graduate students and students in general on a range of these things. And just because you make an appointment doesn't mean you have to do long-term treatment. If maybe you're just looking for really specific individualized skills or strategies to help you with this, you could do 1 or 2 appointments, and that's it. You don't have to sign up for something long-term if you're looking for something really specific. So that's just a little plug for the Counseling Mental Health Center. I also add that we will continue having the Grad Mental Health series this semester. You can check out the website for more information on that. But I want to leave it open for questions, or if you have questions specific to your situation, your circumstance, or you're just wanting advice, general advice for your experience of grad school, or just